Good evening and welcome to another episode of Backyard Farmer. I'm Elizabeth Killinger and Kim will be back in the host chair next week. So we're glad you could join us for another episode of answering your gardening questions. And so give us a call at 402-472-1212 if you live in Lincoln, or toll free at 800-676-5446. Emailed questions and JPEG pictures can be sent to byf@unl.edu and we'll answer them on a future show. We need to know as much information as you can so that way we can give you the proper answer. So include what part of the state that you live in. Backyard Farmer is available during the week on social media, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Pinterest. And so to start our program tonight, let's take a look at some samples. And Jim, you've got a very lovely one there.
All right, I have a trap here, and this is called the spotted wing drosophila trap. And late July is about the time when this nuisancey little, it looks a lot like just the ordinary fruit fly, but it's a fly that actually attacks ripening fruit, especially thin skins like berries and grapes and lots of other kinds of crops that might be maturing about that time. So if you want to know whether or not you have that fly in your area, and so far our traps have shown that they aren't very abundant yet, but they will be picking up speed in terms of numbers, make your own little trap with a deli container, you know, put a few holes in the sides, nice hanger on it, and then put some apple cider vinegar in it. And just leave it out and then check it, you know, maybe every so many days. And if you got any of these flies, like you see in the corner of the neb guide that we have, that have the two little spots at the tips of the wings, if you have a bunch of those, that means you have a lot of them. And then you should consider probably just harvesting a little bit early, or in some cases, some kind of an insecticidal treatment might be necessary if you have a crop that you like to sell or something like that. So just a reminder, end of July, if you're interested in spotted wing drosophila, where they're at in terms of numbers, and if they're in your very own orchard or vineyard or garden, set out a trap and find out.
And it's a good time to go through that trap too when it's all said and done.
It is.
Kind of stinky.
I'll remove it 10 feet away.
All right, thank you. All righty, Cole, what do we have?
A non-stinky sample.
A non-stinky sample.
So yeah, we've had some nice disease pressure the last couple of days with all the rain, so I was out scouting for some disease today, and I was unsuccessful in that search. But everywhere that I thought I saw disease, I found these nice straw-colored patches, and so I was stopping to look for disease lesions and other symptoms, but instead I was finding little barley, which is a winter annual grass. You can see the seeds here. And so this is just senescing. It's completing its life cycle. When this weed and others like it, like downy brome and other winter annual grasses, were showing up in spring and people want to know how to control them, we said keep mowing, they'll go away. And that's happening right now. So definitely thicken up the turf in these areas and maybe use a pre-emergent this fall to keep them from being a problem again next spring. But this is just a winter annual grass completing its life cycle.
Much less stinky than Jim.
Much less stinky.
A little stickery looking.
Yeah. Okay, Lauren, you've got us wondering, what do you have down there?
I have an outstanding sample tonight, and I'm going to tell a story. And this is a story about misidentification. And so many of our viewers have seen us talk about stinkhorns and the eggs that stinkhorns form. And recently I was moving a large mulch pile, and I found these, and I thought that they were the most wonderful stinkhorn eggs that I had ever seen. And they were chained together. I'll show our viewers so you can see them. They're all stuck together, and I thought, boy, this is really neat. Well, Lauren, who actually cannot stand snakes, was toting around black rat snake eggs for 4 days. And the only thing I can say is I'm glad that they did not hatch. I had Dennis come over this morning and tell me what they really were, because unfortunately when I cut into one, it wasn't a mushroom. So when our viewers come in and talk to us about the idea of a stinkhorn looking like a snake egg, they're 100% accurate that they can be. So snake eggs versus a stinkhorn. And Lauren's trauma, and I will not sleep for a week now, probably.
But we are all very proud of you.
Yes, we are.
We are very proud that you brought those in.
Okay.
It's a beginning.
Dennis is going to put them in an incubator and try to raise them.
So you're helping the circle of life.
Yeah, so that I can be scared. Doesn't make any sense, but we'll do it anyway, just for the fans.
Okay, Sarah, what do we have down there?
Well, we're into the harvest season now in the vegetable garden, and so you know, we're getting some nice tomato fruits coming on, ready to be picked and eaten. But the big rain that we had yesterday made me think about the fact that one of the common problems we have in tomatoes is cracking. And so you see here, I've got a couple of smaller cherry tomatoes here that have cracked. And the reason that this happens is that as the tomatoes are nearing maturity, the fruit skin becomes much less elastic. And if we have a big influx of water, like a big rainstorm, oftentimes the skin can't accommodate that, and so the fruits will just crack, okay? So one way you can get around that is if we have a big forecast of rain, is to pick the fruits that are near maturity. Now this little tomato, you know, it's fun to look at these clusters, and you can see the range in coloration as they near maturity. When they start to develop this pinkish color, they have developed all the sugars and flavor components that tomato is going to have. So you can pick the fruit at this stage and bring it in the house and finish ripening it to a nice red stage if there's a rain forecast, and you can totally circumvent, you know, the whole possibility that your fruits will crack. So that's one really good strategy to prevent cracking in the garden. There's also quite a bit of cultural difference between various cultivars of tomatoes as far as susceptibility to cracking. So if you're having, you know, a tremendous amount of trouble with cracking of tomatoes in your garden, you might want to look at trying a different cultivar and see if that helps with the problem too.
All right, thank you, Sarah. So we're going to move on to picture questions.
Okay.
So Jim, we have a butterfly bush. It's in the papillion area on the south side of full sun, surrounded by phlox. They're just wondering what could be going on with it and what's wrong with it.
Okay, so there we go. We got some more information the closer we get. This looks like spider mite injury, two-spotted spider mite injury, and the recent hot, dry weather that we've had really promotes their rapid reproduction, and before you know it, the plants can become literally covered with mites and their fine webbing. So this is going to be happening if we continue to get into the latter part of the summer with periods where there's no rain and it's very warm. So be on the alert to any plants in the garden, ornamentals, even field crops, for signs of spider mites. Start out as fine stippling, you know, pale stippling on leaves, and then gradually they get yellowish, and then eventually the leaves start to die. So you wait too long, you're not going to have any yield of any kind. So be out there taking a look, and you can get more information about how to deal with spider mites, you know, just on the resources that we have online. So.
Alrighty, so those little boogers just suck the plant juices right out.
Yep, it's that time of year.
Yep. Okay, Cole, with your picture questions, they want to know what is it and what can they do about it?
Okay, so this looks like we have some either yellow or green foxtail. I think the desirable turf is in the center picture there, and as we zoom in here, we see the seed head characteristic of yellow or green foxtail. Control strategy is going to be the same for both. Ideally, so these are summer annual grasses, and the best way to control them is with the pre-emergence herbicide in spring at the same time we would control crabgrass. They germinate a little later, so the second application, the split application is really important for these grasses and a similar life cycle grass called goosegrass, right? So just a little later germinating summer annual. Right now, the best thing to do is probably either wait for the frost to kill them, pull them, scalp really low, or use a post-emergence herbicide that contains phenoxaprop or quinclorac, and those will kill foxtails, and then that way you can overseed these areas to really get some dense turf this fall, and then definitely go ahead and fertilize with some starter fertilizer when you seed, and then probably the whole lawn again at least one more time in October to really get some dense turf to resist the infestation of these summer annual grasses next year.
Alrighty, so lots of things we can try and try again next year.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Lauren, this viewer picked a lot of rotten Roma tomatoes, and they were just wondering what is going on with them, what they can do. They live in Southeast Lincoln.
Okay, yeah, so I believe there's one here that shows the fruit
All lined up.
close up, lined up. This one in particular we're looking at isn't the one that had the end rot on it. So there we go.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah, and that's just a great picture, but that's blossom end rot. So that's actually caused by a nutrient deficiency of calcium, and it's irregular moisture is typically many times what can lead to that. So And I don't know, Sarah, if you want to comment, but there's lots of things about trying to increase that availability and such, but it seems like just good moisture can oftentimes
Right.
help. Is there anything
You know,
to add on that?
calcium is not very mobile in plants. It's one of those nutrients where the plant has to have a lot of water to be able to move the calcium efficiently. And if calcium's not moving to those cells break down and you end up with this brown flat spot. So water management is usually the biggest issue. Making sure that plants have a nice even amount of water. Mulching can help because that helps hold moisture in the soil. And then not over fertilizing. Because if the plant is growing really fast because of a lot of nitrogen, the calcium that the plant is able to pull up oftentimes will go to that new foliage instead of to the tomatoes themselves. And so you can also end up with a lot of blossom end rot.
So it looks like a disease, but not at all.
Yep.
All righty. Well, we actually have a question for you, Sarah,
Okay.
in addition to Lauren's question. So what we have is we have a viewer, and they've got some raised beds with their tomatoes. They've done everything they can to amend the soil. They made their own potting mix that goes in there. They have 4 different types of tomatoes and a lot of other plants like cucumbers, onions, and carrots, and it's just not doing well. And so they're wondering what could potentially be going on with some of those crops.
Yeah, and this is a herbicide injury situation. You can look at those little leaflets on the leaf in the picture right now and see how they're deformed, how the veins have all started to kind of go toward the tip of the leaf instead of the nice net pattern that you should see in a normally formed leaf. You can see how small the leaflets are and how curled they are. So this is definitely herbicide damage. And this plant is pretty heavily affected. I mean, the leaves are just so small at this point. Usually what happens with just a smaller amount of herbicide is that plants will eventually start to grow out of the damage. And so sometimes you can get a harvest later in the season. When a plant is as badly affected as this one, oftentimes the flowers will abort. They won't set, so you don't get good pollination and good fruit set. And typically we tell people if whatever fruits were on the plant at the time of the drift incident, that you don't want to harvest those. You want to pick them off and get rid of them. So I don't know that you're really going to get any harvest off of this plant this year because it's so badly affected. So I probably, at this point, would just let it go.
Yeah. So nothing we can do and nothing that could have been done. And
well, if you can figure out where the drift is coming from, if it was something you sprayed, then maybe be a little more careful with spraying if there's a wind. If the drift came from a property around you or a neighbor, and you're on good terms with your neighbors, maybe you could have a little conversation and say, hey, I had some plant damage, and maybe be a little careful with your herbicides and maybe not spray in the middle of the summer because it's a bad time for weed control anyway. That's about all you can do is try to prevent it.
okay. Well, thank you, Sarah. Japanese beetles came into this country by accident about a century ago, and right now they're a real problem, especially in Omaha. The big question is, what can we do about them? They're devouring everything in their path. So here to help us with that is Jody Green and Jonathan Larson.
So Jonathan, what insects have you been talking about the most recently?
Oh, we've had a few calls lately about a very particular species of beetle. The Japanese beetle seems to be quite common right now.
So what's with that? Why is it like the plague in Omaha with Japanese beetles flying around everywhere? But we're not having that problem in Lincoln or other Nebraska cities.
That's true. Japanese beetle is an invasive insect. It takes some time for it to get established in certain areas. So that means that it follows sort of an invasive pattern. And that means that in the first 2 or 3 years that it starts to appear in an area, it's sort of in the background, sinisterly building up and feeding very rarely, getting noticed by people. And then in years 5, 6, and 7, the population really explodes. And that's what we're seeing in Omaha. If you live in other Nebraska cities and you see 1 or 2 of these beetles flying around, be prepared in the next few years for the real invasion to begin.
If you want to identify a Japanese beetle, it's pretty easy to do because they're beautiful and really beautifully colored. So their head and their thorax are this metallic green, and their elytra, or their hard shell wing, are this rich hue of copper. They're 1/2 inch long, and then they have these white tufts of fur on their butt. So when they've got their face deep in a leaf or flower, you can see those characteristic spots sticking out.
Japanese beetles do create distinct symptoms when they feed on a plant like this linden tree here. They skeletonize the leaves, creating a lace-like or doily-like leaf when they finish. They also can feed on fruits and flowers, hollowing out fruits and shredding flowers as they go through there.
And they're not particularly picky either. There are over 300 species of plants that they will eat. Their favorite being linden, birch, grape, raspberries, and pears. So if you've got a landscape, I am sure they will find something to eat there.
Everybody that's called in wants to know, what can we do about this beetle here this year? And unfortunately, most of the answers are going to be not much. The damage has occurred. You have to wait for your plant to recover in most cases. If you have a shrub or a flower or a garden plant or a small tree that you're trying to protect, you can use organic products like neem or pyrethrum-containing insecticides like Piola. Those work really well against the beetle. They last about a week. You'll have to make multiple applications, but they are very helpful in the fight against this beetle. If you have a big mature tree that's been a part of the landscape for a while, it will grow out of it. You just need to wait the beetle out at this point.
If you're worried about your roses or your flowers on your ornamentals, you can always pick the blooms off and wait for the populations to fade before they can rebloom. You can also use a row cover to protect your plants. Or you can do what I do and get into the garden and pick off the beetles and put them in soapy water. It drowns them. It's quite satisfying.
If you want to be proactive in 2018 and protect your plants from Japanese beetle, you need to get out in May around Mother's Day and treat trees with a systemic insecticide containing imidacloprid or dinotefuran. Your tree will be protected for 1 year. You can do that to all species that are susceptible to Japanese beetle except for linden trees, unfortunately. You'll have to treat their leaves instead. You also need to be proactive in terms of treating for the grub, right, Jody?
Right. You can also be proactive next year by treating the soil and treating the immature form of the Japanese beetle by using something like Scott's Grub X on your yard to kill the white grubs. But that doesn't guarantee that you won't see adult beetles next year because they can fly from 5 miles away and they're strong flyers. So unless all your neighbors treat their turf, you're sure to see beetles again next year.
The last treatment thing we want to talk about is some of the things you do want to avoid. You'll see in a lot of garden store displays the Japanese beetle bag traps and the milky spore tubes. We would prefer not to see those get used very frequently because the traps attract more beetles than they can catch and can lead to greater amounts of defoliation in your landscape. And university trials have not really supported the use of milky spore against the grubs. So we do need to rely on some of those more traditional insecticides and not on those other materials that we see in the store.
It's important to remember not to panic. The leaves will fall off the trees in the fall and come back in the spring, and perennials will return.
And the beetles will subside here in the next couple of months. We'll see them fly until about the end of August, but after that we start to see the populations peter out. Everything will be okay.
Yes, the sun will come out tomorrow.
That linden looked pretty rough, and we're all hoping it will be able to grow out of that damage that the beetles have done. And Jonathan's right, you might catch a ton of beetles in those bags, but we really don't want to use them because they're going to attract way more beetles from the neighborhood to your yard. So try to avoid to use those. But.
The homeowner feels really good. They feel like they're accomplishing something by trapping, but Jonathan is right.
Yeah. So we're going to go on to our another round of picture questions. And Jim, this viewer has these bugs on the hackberry trees located here in Lincoln, and they're just kind of wondering what these little guys are.
Okay, these are called pleasing fungus beetles. And that's how they got the name. But anyway, they feed on fungi, and the coloration probably is some kind of warning coloration, like don't mess around with me, I taste bad, or something like that. Got another one, and then, oh, there's the fungus. Now, Lauren, you might be able to explain that. It looks like it's part of the tree.
When you see that type of growth on a tree, usually there's a pretty significant level of rot going on inside the tree. So not sure where this is at in the landscape, but you would want to look, at that and kind of assess it for potentially a hazard tree, because once you see any kind of fungal fruiting structures on the outside, and that's independent of the beetles too, right?
Yeah.
So they're just there, but
They're there feasting on what's developing.
So just watch the tree for a potential hazard tree.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty. So Cole, we have a viewer that they had started their lawn, they used aerator, they grew plug lawn. We're going to continue to mow it throughout the season. They want to use tenacity on the traditional K31 tall fescue.
Okay.
They're wondering, is that a good choice? When they apply it, they want to know, what should they use for a lot of those weeds that have popped up in there in between the plugs. And then they're going to overseed this fall too. So some things to keep in mind with that.
Excellent. Yeah. So pretty good. So this was seeded in spring, and that's pretty good job. Pretty good establishment for a spring seeding. I commend the viewer. That sometimes is very challenging, and so the canopy is still a little dense. I think in that one image I saw, or the canopy is a little sparse. Sorry. And in that one image, I think I just saw kind of some crabgrass and some foxtail and maybe some spurge. And so yeah, they're at the bottom of that picture. And so. There are post-emergence herbicides that will clean these up. The traditional ones like quinclorac and phenoxaprop will control those summer annual grasses, and then the traditional broadleaf herbicides will control spurge. You want to wait until typically 4 to 6 weeks or a couple mowings until you apply those types of herbicides. So having had a spring seeding, you're certainly safe to apply those now to control these grasses, assuming that it doesn't get too hot, right? And we're not going to get offsite movement of the broadleaf herbicide or get the grassy herbicide to damage the injured turf. Tenacity can be a good choice, especially where you're going to seed again this fall. Tenacity can be applied at seeding, so the day that you overseed that tall fescue, you can apply tenacity, and that'll hold down any summer annual grasses that might continue to germinate, or even potentially annual bluegrass. And then you can apply it again 4 weeks after emergence of that tall fescue, so probably 5 to 6 weeks after the seeding.
All righty. All right, Lauren, we've got a viewer, and they've got zucchini squash, and along with the zucchini squash comes, dun, dun, dun.
Beautiful.
Isn't that lovely?
That is just absolutely beautiful. There's some more there, I think, too. They got some other pictures.
lots
Oh,
of
there's some on the
pictures.
ground. There's another one. One we're looking at here is slime mold. So slime mold can grow on anything. I actually brought along a sample tonight, too, of it, just to kind of show another aspect of it. So you can see the pictures there where the slime mold is, and that white growth and kind of chalkiness on it. In this was just on some mulch. And one of the things that we'll see with it, it's real powdery. So it just kind of flakes off. And you can kind of see that it'll be real dusty. And slime molds are, really common in the landscape. It's just not common to see them growing on zucchini. But in any event, they just kind of get that crusty, dry appearance, and just a whole lot of sporulation there going on that they would actually be able to move around. So really neat organisms. They'll be bright yellow to reds to whites, and you can see them grow on anything. Just take a hose and wash them off. They're not really going to do any damage.
And speaking of washing off, Dan says you have to wash the desk off.
Well, we'll see about that. I'm still waiting for my snake eggs to hatch, so nothing's happened yet. So when these come out of here, it's going to get to be really good TV because I'm going to be out of here.
Okay, Sarah, for your next picture, we've got some pictures of some seeds that they would like identified. She said that the chickens kind of scratched them up a bit.
Well, the smaller seed in the lower part of this person's hand looks like a Kentucky coffee tree. They have kind of a flat pod that's fairly large, although this one is a little shorter than we typically see. It's not quite the normal look of a Kentucky coffee tree seed pod. The rough one that they're holding open now, I have to admit I've never seen a seed that looks like that before. I don't know if it is Kentucky coffee tree and the chickens have scratched it up so much that they've caused all of this roughness on the outside of the seed coat. But that is not something that I'm familiar with looking at.
What about mango? Because sometimes they have that fuzzy seed pod inside, and then they have the seeds inside too. So if they fed chickens mango, maybe.
Yeah, it could be.
Tropical chickens.
Yeah, it's not one that I'm real familiar with though, so that's a little bit of a stumper.
I guess they'll just have to wait and see if anything comes up.
Yeah, plant it, see what grows.
We've seen some really great ornamentals in our garden this season, and Nebraska Extension educator Terry James has been giving us a tour of some All-America selections in recent weeks. So let's take a minute to hear from Terry at the Backyard Farmer Garden.
This week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, we're going to continue our little series of the 2017 All-America Selection winners and how they're doing in our Backyard Farmer Garden. We have a new watermelon called Mini Love. Kind of excited about this one. This is actually bred specifically for watermelons in containers. So the vines are only going to get to be about 2 to 3 foot long.
supposed to have at least 5 to 6 fruits on it that are about 5 pounds each. As you can see, they're doing pretty well in our raised beds. We have a few small little watermelons on it, so we're gonna keep an eye on it. Hopefully no bugs or insects come and bother it, so we can actually get some fresh watermelon out of this. And it is a red watermelon. So those of you in small spaces can actually grow some fresh watermelon in your backyard. That's what's happening in the Backyard Farmer Garden this week.
That's a great idea. You don't have to save 3/4 of your garden, dedicate it to grow it into watermelons. So you can try them in the container and save some space too at the same time. So Jim, we have a viewer. They think that on their sugar maple, they could potentially have woolly white aphids.
Correct.
And so they were wondering what they could use on them so that way their tree is not damaged or possibly on their
I was
other-
thinking just dislodge them with the jet spray of the garden hose in as much. I mean, they usually infest the lower portions of the tree anyway, so just blast them because they really can't go. There's winged forms, but they move to serviceberry and other related trees in the summertime. So I think you're a little bit late on this, so you can send them on their way by blasting them with the garden hose.
Strong stream of
Yep.
water. Get them off of there. Alrighty. So we have a viewer that would like to know the status of the brown marmorated stink bugs. And so they wanted to know if it's getting worse, and it was supposed to be a discussion between the two of you, I guess.
Who are the two of us?
I guess Cole's kind of looking at me, so
Not on purpose.
not on purpose.
Well, anyway,
You can talk to yourself.
I guess you guys are talking to yourself.
I'll talk to you, Jim, about it. I don't know anything about it. We can talk about it. My snake eggs are starting to move.
They're starting to wiggle.
brown marmorated stink bug. We have a number of people cooperating, setting traps out, and this year we haven't turned up anything. But one of our master gardeners had them show up at her door screen here in Lincoln 2 years in a row, but our traps aren't picking any of them up. And so as far as we know, we've had a few episodes like in Omaha last year, a few reports of them, and so in Lincoln here a little bit. But State Department of Agriculture, I believe, is also putting traps out, and we're really not having anything significant. So it's always nice to have these invasives kind of come in sequence rather than all at once. This is the Japanese beetle one. Brown marmorated might be another 4 or 5 years before it's that bad.
All right.
I concur.
Okay, we'll give you a real one, okay? We'll toss you an easy one. So we have a viewer whose yard has just been taken over with Nimble. They want to know when is the best time and what product that they can use for that.
Okay, so Nimble is a perennial warm season grass, and so it's going to green up later in spring than your cool season grasses, but it's a little bit earlier than the warm seasons. And so right when it's greening up in early spring or late spring, is when we want to control it. Non-selective herbicides like glyphosate are an option. Or there's a selective option, tenacity, which we talked about a little bit earlier on the show. It is also a good utility herbicide to control Nimble. In Kentucky bluegrass, you can make higher rate applications up to 8 ounces, and you can do 2 applications like that legally in a year, or you can go for 3 applications at 5 ounces or thereabouts. And you'll need multiple applications, 2 to 3 apps to kill Nimble in multiple years.
So you're not going to be done in 1 year.
A career.
Yeah, it'll take a while. You probably will never win, but
You can try. It's encouraging, Cole.
So Lauren, maybe you can help this viewer out. So there is a dogwood that has spots on the blooms and leaves this spring, and now the leaves are starting to curl. They treated it with neem oil, and it seemed to do a little bit better. It's been in the yard a little over a year. It's a Coosa dogwood type, so they're wondering what they could possibly do for these leaf spots.
So a lot of times on dogwood, we see some of the Cercospora leaf spots that can occur on them. The best thing would be is try to manage those early in the year so that you don't have development, so you get a lot of that. All those little spots are producing just thousands of spores, and it makes it a lot more difficult to manage. The other thing is the neem product is going to be helpful to some extent, but it's going to be limited in its activity and not have any residual. So you may want to look at using another type of more of a fungicide that's not neem next year when it's starting. I really wouldn't, I'd hate to recommend things as you get into the season and you have so much disease, you might just want to watch this and let it go, but then next year try to get on a good management program early on.
Alrighty. So
And you can win.
you can win. It's not like the Nimble will.
Yeah.
So Sarah, we have a viewer that has a sweet corn plot. The plot is 10 by 12, and the corn is healthy, 7 foot tall, fully tasseling, but no ears. The rows are about 2 foot apart. Plants are 12 inches between in the rows, and they're just wondering what's going on with their sweet corn.
Well, you know, the first thing that comes to mind for me on that one is again, nitrogen. If they're fertilizing a little too heavily in the garden planting, it could be that they're just getting a lot of foliage growth, and that's inhibiting the development of ears. So you might want to just take another look at your fertility program and see if maybe that's what's causing the problem. Honestly, that's the only thing that I can think of right offhand that would cause it not to set ears.
So main thing, look at your fertility and hope next year's better.
Right.
And while you're doing that, we're going to start the lightning round. So Sarah, this is a first for me. No.
Yeah.
So you're up, Sarah. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, we have a Malcolm viewer, and they're wondering why their early tomatoes are not maturing yet.
Heat, high heat can cause that. So the 90-degree temperatures we had might be a factor.
What can I do to remove a stump?
Time is, or having it ground out.
Okay. Washington County, our ash that was over 20 foot tall, it broke off. They want to know if they can use one of the shoots and still get a nice tree out of it.
No. Suckers or side shoots are generally not very strongly attached to the tree, and so you could get some growth on it, but then at some point in the future it can break out of the tree. So it's not really a great idea.
How far and when can I cut back old sumac without killing it?
What I would suggest is that if you go in and you cut out the heaviest stems, which is a technique Jeff might be demonstrating here later in the show, but if you take the heaviest stems, cut them all the way down to the ground, then with what you have remaining, if you need to take some height off, you can do that. And that would probably be the best way to keep it healthy and yet do some good pruning.
When should I stop fertilizing my flowers and hydrangeas with the bloom booster or any other fertilizers?
Annual flowers, you can go ahead and keep fertilizing those all the way until into the fall until they die. But if this is a perennial hydrangea that you're wanting to keep, you really wouldn't fertilize it anymore yet this year. You would want to have stopped by now. Okay. Roses too.
All right, so stop fertilizing now.
Yes, for perennials.
For perennials. All right, Lauren, have they hatched yet?
Haven't, but I'm ready to run when they do, so
Okay.
do this.
So we'll go fast. Are Japanese flowering cherries susceptible to powdery mildew?
Ooh. I'm not sure on cherries. I haven't ever seen it. I'm going to pass and have to get back to that in a minute.
Does borax work for lawn diseases? And if so, what is the proportion and the mix?
I'm not going to create a mix for borax. I did that one time, and that was a bad mistake because people will mess it up. And I wouldn't really recommend it for turf diseases.
Okay. Have you seen bur oak blight in the Lincoln area?
Yes.
Is there a fall spray schedule for diseases for spruce trees, especially for our Norfolk viewers?
Fall spray schedule on spruce, typically not. Usually our fungal diseases, we're trying to manage those in the spring and maybe into this time of year, but not really in the fall.
Can fruit and leaves from apples with apple scab go into the compost bin without the fear of reinfecting?
Yes, as long as it's composted completely and you're breaking down all the material.
How can I keep my service berries from rusting next year?
Ooh, that's a tough one too. I wouldn't worry about trying to treat that. I don't think it's going to be that bad. I would just let them rust a little bit and enjoy them.
WD-40.
Yeah, WD-40. Yeah, WD-40. Perfect, Jim. You got it.
Metal.
Yeah.
Okay, Cole. Lawn company can't aerate until September, but they want to overseed now. They're in the Kearney area. Should they wait?
Yes.
On which part?
I would say, I would probably go ahead and wait to seed until after the lawn company is aerated. That'll slow down the development of your lawn a little bit, but I think that's what I would do.
Okay. Can I start my dandelion control now in the Omaha area?
I don't think it's probably a little bit early still. I would wait until later in August and into September.
I concur.
So the seed mix has perennial rye in it. Is that a good mix for overseeding in the Hastings area?
I wouldn't recommend that. I would say tall fescue, Kentucky bluegrass, something like that.
I need to overseed a thin lawn by Lake McConaughey. There's no irrigation. When and what type of seed should I use?
Where exactly is Lake McConaughey?
west.
Out west.
Out west?
Ogallala, way out west.
Okay, so
Not way.
I would say if it's a low management area, buffalo grass, seed it in the spring.
Okay. How do I get rid of plantain in the lawn? And when? And they're in the Sioux City area.
Broadleaf herbicide like 2,4-D in the fall.
All right.
Great job.
No time for another question for
Wow.
you.
Oh,
All right,
wow.
Jim.
Look at that.
I'm ready.
Good job.
You did it.
You got this.
All right, Jim, in Madison City, will permethrins be used to treat woolly aphids on maples, hurt the roses and the ferns?
Nope, won't do it.
How can I get rid of spiders in the house without using bug bombs?
I would seal cracks and crevices on the outside of the home perimeter and possibly do a perimeter treatment to keep any insects and spiders away.
So this viewer brought in some firewood. It was diseased and full of ants, and they're wondering what type of ants would probably be in there.
There's an ant that doesn't have a name called Echinogaster ant, though it frequently infests trees, and it could be a carpenter ant too, like red carpenter ant or black carpenter ants.
We have a Plattsmouth viewer that has bunches of oak leaves on the twigs that are dropping off. Could it be the oak twig girdler, and is there anything that they can do about it?
I think this is the year for oak twig girdlers. When the terminal ends of the leaves flag, they just die off, and then they can break off as well. But that's not harmful to the tree.
How do I get rid of flea beetles in strawberries and yet still have strawberries to eat?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. But I would say probably something like your, pyrethrins kinds of sprays that don't persist very long, and then you have to observe the pre-harvest interval, the number of days or hours or whatever before you can bite into that luscious strawberry.
We're giving Cole props. He's the winner.
Yeah.
Hey.
Good.
You did very well. Very well.
Except I didn't know where Lake McConaughey was. So I
Yeah,
apologize.
we're working on that. Nebraska geography, we'll work on it, but you lost some points there. So Sarah, what do we have for our plants of the week this week?
So we have a coneflower and a honeysuckle. So here in the front, we have a honeysuckle called Major Wheeler. That's the name of the cultivar. And it'll get to be about 6 to 8 feet tall with these, beautiful vines with the orange flowers. Very, very attractive to hummingbirds. So if you're wanting to, bring hummingbirds to your landscape, this would be a great one to try. Full sun to partial shade is where it really does its best, and you'll have the best flowers. And honeysuckles, if you haven't ever noticed, have a really unusual leaf. I'll just kind of pull this out here. You've got 2 leaf sections, but they're joined together, and they wrap around the stem. That's a really unusual kind of a leaf that we see in this particular kind of plant. So that's Major Wheeler honeysuckle. Then the other flower we have is this coneflower right here. This is a native coneflower in Nebraska. Rudbeckia subtomentosa is the botanical name. Sweet coneflower is the common name. This one gets quite tall. It can be about 5 to 6 feet. So if you're going to plant it in a home landscape, you're definitely going to need to, put it somewhere in the back or of the garden where it can serve as a backdrop for other plants. It may need to be staked in the garden too to hold it up and keep it from flopping down. Or it can be planted in like a prairie planting with some tall native grasses like big blue stem or something like that to give you a nice planting of combination blooming plants and grasses.
All right, and as always, a beautiful bouquet for the plant of the week this week.
You bet.
So Jim, we're going to go back to our picture questions, and we've
Okay.
gotten several of these questions of people wanting identification on what
Okay, so-
exactly these insects are.
All right, I'll be very quick on those.
Very quick on your insect questions, because
Okay.
there's lots of fun ones.
That's called a black witch. It flies up every year from the tropics, and so it's a gem when you find it, on your porch light at night or whatever in the morning, that kind of a thing. So anyway, black witch. All right, this is called a meal moth. It feeds on grain, so it's a grain pest, but not very common like Indian meal moth is. This is the meal moth. Right, next one. And that's a Pandora's sphinx, and so that's the one that feeds on grape and Virginia creeper and related plants, kind of a hornworm type of greenish caterpillar with really bright spots. Another generation of those coming out. This is a black horsefly. It is the fear of anybody swimming this time of year in swimming pools and the like, because horseflies like to land on people's wet, bare skin and take a stab. So Black horsefly. More of a problem during the old days when they had lots of horses.
Still not pleasant when they bite you, though.
Not pleasant.
All right, cool. This plant came up in front of the house. They would like to see what it is. It's about 6 foot tall. The blooms kind of remind them of smartweed. They're in Platte County, just south of Lindsay, which is kind of center part of it.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I need all the help I can get there. So the first one, you're right that it looks like a smartweed flower because that's in the Polygonum family, the buckwheat family, and I think it's an ornamental mountain fleece, or also goes by red bird's trot.
And some of the other ones that we had pictures for.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot there were other pictures. I was done. I was cashing in.
No, you're not done yet.
The second one there, that looks like beggar's lice, and so that's just it's a biennial plant, so it'll make a rosette the first year, and you can kill it with Roundup or triclopyr when it's young. And then the last one here, that's honeyvine milkweed, and that's a perennial vine, makes rhizomes and deep roots, and you're going to need 2,4-D with dicamba mixture, 2 or 3-way mixture of broadleaf herbicide. And my knee-jerk reaction was initially that a fall application would be best, like most of our perennial weeds, but I found some research that shows that late spring applications in June and even into July offer a little bit better control for that weed.
Okay, you guys are getting all sorts of pictures in a row. Lauren, you don't get that.
I'd probably miss them anyway.
It's okay. So we have a viewer from the Omaha area. They have a swamp white oak tree. The whole branch plus a smaller branch is affected. They tried to look it up. They weren't really sure what it was, so they were wondering if you might have an answer as to what exactly it might be on their oak.
And this one in particular, the way it's faded, that almost looks
It
like
almost
spider
looks like spider mites
or
again.
something again on
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Now, the distribution, though, where you've got just a branch affected and you have a dead branch in there, it really looks more like it could be a canker or
Yeah,
something.
those
So
are
I don't know,
clean.
Jim, if that would relate. You know, it could be that maybe even that branch was a little stressed and the spider bites could. I don't know.
There's a possibility.
But-
Some of them look clean, like they don't have
Yeah.
spider mites on them at all, so there might be a combination of things going on.
Could be,
there.
but I would follow those individual branches down and then really look for any type of swelling or abnormal growth on those branches. And if you would see that, there's a good chance you'd have some sort of a fungal canker, which you'd prune that out 3 to 4 inches below the affected area. So again, sorry, you can't really say for sure on those, but when you see a branch affected like that, usually it's some sort of an injury or canker.
Sarah, we have a Ansley viewer, and they had that late snow, and they had a couple red maples and lilacs along with some dogwood leaves that are growing in clumps, and they're really weird looking leaves on them. So they were just wondering if it was just the season this year, or maybe it's just something that's going on, or what could be going on with those plants.
Well, this isn't a disease or anything going around on the trees. You've had a significant amount of branch dieback in these trees. The trees are trying to stay alive, though, and so they're sending out lots of little shoots from the portions of the branches that are still alive. And that's why you're seeing those clumps of growth on various portions. You know, unfortunately, none of these trees look good enough that I think that they're going to be really good long-term plants in your landscape. I mean, one of them was over 50% dead branches, and those branches aren't going to releaf. They're not going to send out new shoots. If they haven't put out new growth by now, they're not going to. So I really think the bigger question here is whether or not you're going to take those plants out and replant. And unfortunately, I think with all of 3 of these different plants, I think you're going to have to remove them because they just are looking so bad.
Yeah. So take your inventory and
Yeah.
maybe.
Fall is a great time for replanting. September is a good time. So
There we go. Lilac should be pruned every so often to promote growth and flowering. And sometimes those older stems can get too large and they can contain borers. So for our second feature tonight, Jeff Culbertson is going to give us some tips to make the right cuts with our lilacs.
Every year on Backyard Farmer, we'll get a variety of questions dealing with the health of our shrubs, in particular our flowering shrubs like lilacs that are behind me, viburnums, forsythia, honeysuckle, you name it, kind of these big flowering shrubs that we have in our landscape. So many times the questions are, I have a certain insect, might have disease, mildew is a common problem, the size of the plant, it's getting too big for me, what do I do? So really the solution to so many of these questions is getting in and doing some pruning. So the pruning will do a variety of things, especially in lilacs and some of our other shrubs. If we have insects that are infesting it, by taking out the oldest canes, the oldest wood, will help remove those insects from there. And if you take them someplace where they're ground up, all the better, so that way we know that those bugs are going to be chopped into little bits. The other thing that doing that does is also brings the size down, so it's a more manageable size. We don't have that 12-foot tall lilac in our yard anymore. Now it's only 6 to 8 foot, or be it a viburnum or forsythia, we just bring the size down to the size that we had anticipated when we planted it in the first place. So if we're having some disease issues, pruning it out helps open it up, get more air movement in there, and again, we have those problems just kind of instantly go away because we've taken care of it. So some of the things that we need to think about when we're doing it, first of all, to make sure that we're prepared. You know, for something like this, we're gonna want some sharp saws. I have a folding saw here that works very well for things. If you have bigger canes or bigger shrub, you might wanna use a larger hand saw with a fixed blade. So that'll help you do a little bit better job in there. Certainly if you're using sharp tools, you're gonna wanna have gloves on to make sure that you protect yourself, and then safety glasses as well, because you'll be sticking your face in there, you don't wanna get anything in your eye. So when we do this, we're gonna wanna go ahead and cut things back to about 6 to 8 inches, those canes that I remove. So fairly close to the ground, we wanna take those out. And again, I'm looking for I'm kind of going through counting the canes, picking out the largest, oldest canes, the third oldest ones. And sometimes if you have one in there, maybe it's not gonna qualify for that, but it's already died back, or we're already having some issues with it, you can go ahead and take that one out as well. But that's what we're looking at, about a third a year. And if you do that on a fairly consistent basis, every year you go in and take a few canes out, you'll find that that plant's at a good size, it's gonna flower more prolifically, so you're gonna have a better flower effect every year, and we're not gonna have the insect and the disease issues that you've been dealing with.
As always, start with anything diseased or damaged, and then move on to the older growth and the overgrown stems and those that you can't put your hand around. Those are getting a little big. So more picture questions, Jim.
Okay.
There's some caterpillars that were all over their pansies, and they were starting to feed to the point where they were defoliated. Can you identify
Yes,
those?
Those are worth
lovely
keeping.
ones?
Those, the first set, but
first
that's
set?
not those there. But the first set were variegated fritillary caterpillars, and so move them on to wild violets. And that way you can save your pansies, and they will finish out, and they're beautiful butterflies in the landscape. All right, now I'll go faster.
And then we're going to go on to the next ones,
so
and they
the
want to
next
know
one,
what these guys are.
Those are, no, why can't I remember it now? It's the milkweed tussock caterpillars. Those are the earlier ones, and then I think you don't have one of a more mature one. But yeah, they're just kind of cute. They don't really harm the milkweed. They're one phenomenon with milkweed.
One phenomenon.
Yep.
And then there's one
there
more.
you see,
There
there's
we
a
go.
mature one. They really look cute. Kind of like a hairy dachshund or something like that.
I've never referred to a caterpillar as cute before.
Okay,
Oh, and then this guy.
That is the tobacco hornworm. So it will feed on tomato and potato leaves as well as tobacco if we had tobacco in Nebraska. Very common.
Okay, so lots of good pictures. for
Yeah,
tonight,
it's
and
buggy time this year. There's just so many of them coming out with all the heat and everything growing so verdantly.
Okay, Cole. We have a viewer whose husband brought home some sand mixture used on the golf course to fill the divots. They have killed it with Roundup. They've dug out dead grass. They've reseeded it many years, and it keeps coming back. What is it, and what can they do?
Okay, so this looks like creeping bentgrass, and I would be even more confident saying that, knowing that they brought divot mix home from a golf course. Creeping bentgrass is a turf that's common on fairways, tees, and especially putting greens on golf courses. Perennial grass, spreads by stolons, really tough to kill. Glyphosate would be one option. It'll take multiple applications within a year, starting in fall, and then it'll take multiple years to do that. And then the other option is tenacity. We've talked about tenacity a couple times tonight, that active ingredient mesotrione, and it's another product that will selectively, so no damage to the Kentucky bluegrass or tall fescue that's beneath, selectively remove creeping bentgrass. And you can start with applications at 5 to 8 ounces per acre and get 2 to 3 applications in beginning in fall.
So lots to do.
Yeah. And that'll, again, take multiple years and make sure
May not win.
May not win, yeah. No, you can win. You can beat Nimble will too, right? But definitely treat an area larger than you see. If you're going to spot treat, I wouldn't recommend spraying the whole lawn, right? Spot treat, but only treat areas or treat larger than the area you see, about 5 or 10 feet bigger, because the stolons are probably spreading out there.
Alrighty. So Lauren, a few days ago, the tomato plants in the raised beds, they were growing really well. They were setting on fruit. They kept the soil moist, and then this weekend they started to notice that the leaves were getting some spots and starting to turn yellow. They're just wondering what is going on with them.
And I'm going to push this one over to Jim, because I'm pretty sure this is
Yeah, that
spider mites.
disease looks exactly like
Yeah.
spider mites.
So a lot of diseases on tomatoes, but
Yeah,
that's
spider mites
not.
again, for tomatoes, Pepper's garden, if you have some cool days, you can spray them with a horticultural spray oil, and that will do a good job in killing them. But make sure you get all the leaves exposed to the spray as well. But you're going to have to know that you're not going to have a real hot day.
So Sarah, we have a viewer from Fremont. They planted this columnar tree last year. It was off to a really good start this spring. They noticed that the leaves potentially could have gotten some drift from a field next to the house. They're wondering if this tree could potentially regenerate next year, or if they need to replace it this fall.
I think this was the tree that I was thinking of earlier, Elizabeth, where it was it had so much dead, and no. I think you're going to have to take this one out and start over. September's a good time to plant trees.
An opportunity to try something new, right?
That's right.
And then we also have some red oak trees. These are about 3 years old as well. So again, same type of thing.
Yeah.
Are they worth keeping, or is it
No.
something we got to try something else?
It looks like this tree also has iron chlorosis, which could be a part of the problem because the leaves are so yellow. But we don't see this much branch dieback with iron chlorosis unless it's really advanced and the tree's been affected for several years in a row. So I'm thinking that since this has only been in the ground for about 3 seasons, that there's something else going on that's resulting in that much branch dieback. I think the oak has maybe a little bit better chance if you wanted to prune out the dead branches and really watch that basic care, watering, mulching around the base, that type of thing, and see if possibly it can grow out. Has a little bit better chance than the columnar tree that we looked at first. But even so, it's looking pretty rough.
Yeah. So not very promising.
Yeah, right.
So now we're going to move on to some of our announcements that we have. So to start off, the Omaha Iris Society is having their rhizome sale on Friday. Information's on the screen for more information. The Lincoln Iris Society is also having their rhizome sale, but they're having theirs on Saturday. So you could do them both if you really wanted to. And again, information is on the screen. And then we're going to do Pollinator Toxin Tour on Thursday, August 3rd from 9 to 3. And then you can go to the website for more information. And then Produce from the Heart, donate your extra produce every Tuesday through September from 4:30 to 6:30 at the Backyard Farmer Garden. And here is our totals from Produce from the Heart, the Grow a Row donations. They have had over 144 pounds donated, and then the Backyard Farmer Garden has had over just about 350 pounds total. And then there's a website on the screen for more information on where it goes. Alrighty, we don't have much time, Jim.
Okay.
So, they have these big honkin' wasps in the yard. That's not the term they use, but yeah. And they want to know what they can do for them.
Okay, cicada killer wasp. Only thing I can say is try to keep your lawn or the areas affected as wet as you can to discourage digging. If you want to try a granular insecticide like bifenthrin to do the same thing, it may not guarantee that it'll kill them, but at least deter them from digging in those areas. But there really isn't much that you can do.
Okay.
It's going to pass another week or two. Well, mid-August is probably when they'll start to disappear. But they're not really aggressive, so.
They're just scary.
They're scary. I admit it. They're scary. They really look scary.
All right.